Sort of on the verge of tears. I remember I'd called my mum and told her at this point that this was happening. I tried to sort it by myself, but I told my mum, which again was like really hard for me because I really felt like I had failed. Hello and welcome back to the podcast. Now I realise that I've done the cardinal sin of podcasting, which is starting a podcast with intentions to progress and release every week, and then going away on holiday, being a little bit busy, a little bit strung out for time, and stopping, which you should never do. Never ever start a podcast and stop it. It's the ultimate say you're going to do something but not actually do it. But I'm back. I'll be honest, I had a bit of like a sort of a crisis identity factor going on here of like what I wanted the podcast to be. Had a very good idea of what I wanted it to be in the beginning. Thought maybe I should go a different direction. I'm actually now doubling down on the original vision. But yeah, it is good to be back. I promise I've got some really great stuff coming for this show. I've got 3 great guests lined up to have every other week, which will be supplemented with these one-on-ones. I'm really excited to just keep doing what I'm doing, talking about media with interesting people. And again, I kind of realized I started with 2 interviews, one very short one-on-one podcast, and I realized I've never really sort of spoken to people exactly about my origin story in media, how I got my start. A question I do get a lot, which is from younger people, which is how do I start in media? Where do I start? And the frustrating part about that question, which I think I said in my first ever episode, is that that's a really hard question to answer. It keeps changing. Media keeps changing. And my story is different to someone else who I asked, is different to someone else, and everyone's doing slightly different things in different areas. And the only way I can do that is sort of fill in my background and sort of like talk you through where my career started, my origins in television, dropping out of university, going into commercial, doing podcasting. It's kind of been interesting to see my career change every 18 months to 2 years, which is both really exciting and slightly daunting. So if you're interested, thank you so much for listening. I'm just going to talk you through where I started, my story, how I got to doing what I do now, advice, mistakes. I'm going to run through it all. Just to let you know, I am filming outside for those of you just listening. It is 31 degrees today in London, so it's no joke. The fans are on indoors, doors are shut. It's hot. I'm in a carpeted, thick-walled house, and I'm doing my best to keep cool where I can. But yeah, for those of you who don't know me, I'm a video producer, content creator, presenter, podcaster. Quite a lot of labels for what I do now, as I sort of like pivoting into this different world. But for those of you who don't know, I most likely might know me from doing a podcast with my mate George called Pulp Kitchen. It's a film podcast. We've been doing it for nearly 4 years. We're going to be celebrating our 200th episode in October, and we're doing our first ever live show. So if you want to go and check that out, I'll leave a link to buy tickets. And if you're fans of Pulp Kitchen and you're listening to this, thank you so much for coming. Do let me know in the comments if you've come from Pulp Kitchen, and if you're not, by all means go and check out if you like what I'm about and you go, hey, but what does he think about films, go and check out Pulp Kitchen. So the first thing to say is I grew up in northwest London. I've always been a huge fan of films and television, and that's really kind of like the first part of my interest of where I maybe would have thought I'd been working in production. But I think unlike a lot of people, it was never clear to me when I was younger that I would go on to work in media, film, television. It's quite typical for a lot of younger people to pick up hobbies like photography, filmmaking, design, art, painting, drawing, sort of like in their early teen years, mid-teen years. That honestly never really happened to me. I was always into films, was always into gaming. I was always very techie, like I loved computers, so I could sort of see the angle there. This is all kind of like just an extension of how techie I've always been. But I never really considered that I would work in media or that I would do what I do now. And a big part of that is that the jobs that I've done didn't really exist when I was a kid. And it was always funny sometimes at my school, we would have these people come in and talk to us about work in university and like where you should go with your career. And a lot of the things we used to hear was that, I think it was, they'd say some stat like 50% of you in this room right now, your job doesn't exist yet. And that was always a really frustrating, unhelpful thing to hear, because it was like, okay, well, what do I do with that information? But they were totally right. For me in particular, like I was never going to be sort of, a finance person. I hated maths. I don't want to talk about maths. I made my peace with maths and it's done. I wasn't a languages person. I never really sort of I enjoyed other subjects, but I never was really like, I like history, I want to go and study history. I was never like, I like geography, I want to go and study geography. I like English, I want to go and study English. I never really had a subject at school that I would say was mine. And that's a really tough place to be in when you see that other people are like, they're huge English people, or they're really into one other thing. The only exception for that, I would say, is drama and theatre. Loved acting, again, from working in films my whole life. From watching films my whole life. Obviously, acting was just like something that I loved, and it always felt like an extra lunch break or a break. If I was given if we got a drama lesson, it was like, oh my God, this is so much better than maths or chemistry or anything. It was just a time to like dick around and have fun with friends. A lot of people felt that. A lot of people really hated it, but I was like, this is perfect. And genuinely to this day, I took drama through all the way through GCSE and A-level. I genuinely believe the most useful skills I've got in life for what I do have come from performing, speaking in front of people, working collaboratively with a team, with difficult people, clashing with ideas. I genuinely think that is some of the most useful collaborative training I could ever have got. And I know in other people's careers, they don't have to sort of project and speak and perform in the same way that other careers do. But I really think they're some of the most important skills I've got, even running through television and working today. I think I'm really lucky that the idea of speaking in front of a crowd of people isn't daunting to me. I definitely get nervous, but I really do attribute drama GCSE and drama A-level for just breaking down all of those nervous barriers. So that was one subject where I really was like, oh, that's my subject, but it's not really considered very academic. The work wasn't always like, very intellectually stimulating, but I nonetheless loved it. But yeah, so the kind of school I went to, I really enjoyed my time at school, and it was a school in northwest London, and it was kind of expected that you were meant to do well. I wouldn't say it was this sort of like drill sergeant, militaristic kind of education where like you were forced to, get the A star, and if you didn't get an A star 100%, you were out. I do kind of like the fact that the school had a nice sort of open and more liberal approach to education. It was still very much expected that you would do well, but what I really like about the school that I went to is that it did encourage you to think outside the box and not just memorize the textbook or just write down what the teacher was saying to you. There were lots of teachers who really sort of like taught beyond what was written down, and I think cultivated people who were genuinely interested in learning something else for themselves, which I think is a good part of education. Like, you should want to come out of that and pursue your own interests. But it definitely was expected. It was, it was a fee-paying school, and it was definitely expected that you were going to do very well, and that you most likely should be applying for a Russell Group university. And if you were really good, you should be going to Oxbridge. And I've no doubt that the school had a quota. They wanted to make sure that they got a certain number of kids into Oxbridge every single year, because they would be marked on their sixth form applicants would basically be looking at how many Oxbridge candidates they got, and they would be compared with other schools. So I was definitely aware of that. And the idea of not you going to university was definitely not indulged. And the idea of doing something not, or something with a studies on it or something creative really wasn't discussed. It wasn't like sort of unpacked as an opportunity. And just obviously, like, I left school in 2013, so it was an A-level during the 2010s, and GCSEs like 2009, 10, 11. So like, obviously social media wasn't a thing. YouTube was in its infancy. Nobody was gonna sit you down and think about like being a content creator as a real career, or even the idea of working in television, which has obviously been around for decades. It just still was never really like, no one ever sort of looked at my strengths and said, why don't you go into production? Like, that never happened. And I don't really blame anyone for that. It just very much was the expectation. And definitely from my parents, it was like, I wasn't a bad student, but I just never really was getting A stars. Like, if I could be pushed through attrition with tutors to like get a fairly decent grade. But I just think I always really knew that none of the subjects I did, I loved. So like at GCSE, you had to do 10 subjects, then you narrow that down to four A-levels. And I remember just thinking, like, going through my GCSEs, I was like, I really don't fancy any of these apart from drama, and drama and theatre was like my favorite A-level. But like, I ended up doing English literature, history, politics, which was great, and drama. And I did English because it was just more humanities-based, more discussion-based, kind of similar to film and cinema and drama. I did history because it was kind of similar, but I dropped that because I just found it so hard to like memorize everything and like all the essays I just found too much. Politics, which is great, and again, an amazing education. Politics should be taught to everyone, I think, from the age of sort of like 10, 11 or year 7. It's probably some of the most important thing you could learn. And then drama, which was amazing. Once I dropped history, I was doing 3 subjects. One of them was drama, and it was like a third of my time was spent dicking around in a theatre creating stuff. And I loved it. Again, it was like, I could say again, just like great skills for me to use. But I'd never thought about a career in media. I still hadn't really picked up a camera. I never really been into photography, had never been into video. Like I was just kind of, I don't know what I'm going to do. And I ended up applying to universities, doing okay in my A-levels, and I sort of got this idea that I'd want to go and study psychology. And at the time, I really did sort of back that opinion because, as I said, I wasn't into any of my subjects. I was genuinely interested in psychology and the idea of like the syllabuses that I read up on and the kind of conversations they were having and the ways in which people were being studied. And, I was really looking forward to discussing and writing about psychology. I can really tell now that was me trying to clutch, because I think what people do with psychology is it's quite an open degree. You can go on to do quite a lot of different things with that. A lot of people go into teaching, some people go into psychology, what's it called, psychotherapy, or they go on to be therapists. Some people go into marketing. Like it's quite open and you can do quite a lot of things with a psychology degree. So I can really look back at that now and say you did that because you just really didn't know exactly what you wanted to do. I wasn't going to do English. I didn't really want to go and do drama school because I just didn't really consider it to be a proper career. I did try and become an actor later for a bit, but never really properly. And politics, again, I didn't want to do. So I was just like clutching at straws. But nonetheless, I was really excited to go and do psychology, and I got into the University of Sussex, which of the other places I applied to Manchester, I applied to Reading, I actually can't remember where else, but Sussex had like the biggest and the best psychology course, so I took that opportunity, and so I started at Sussex, which was a really great university in so many ways. It was down in Brighton, which was in my head like a little bit nicer than going somewhere all the way up north. Brighton's a really cool town. Sorry if there's drilling, by the way, in airplanes. I'm outside. Brighton's a really cool town to spend my uni years. Like I met really great people, and psychology was okay. But when I got there, I realized that most of what I was doing was maths and statistics, which just broke me. Like, I hated maths. I really just don't have a brain for it. Like, if you try and get me to count up poker chips on a table, I just melt. My brain evaporates. I have other skills and I've come to peace with it. But when I applied for the course, I did know stats was going to be a part of it, and I was prepared for that. But when you look at the course syllabus, statistics is like this tiny, tiny strand of the course. And I was like, okay, there's going to be a bit of maths, but mostly this is really interesting conversations. And I just never, ever in my psychology degree got the chance to really like write essays, sit down, discuss in seminars and analyze studies and talk to people about the implications. That was such a small part of it. And I realized that really early on. And I just kind of was like, I'll do my psychology degree, but I quite want to sort of like get this whole thing done. And the crucial thing to mention, which I didn't mention, is that I actually applied to do what's called psychology with American studies. And you might say, what the hell's American studies? I don't really know either. But what that included was a year abroad in America, which is obviously really cool. And you do your first year, your second year. For your third year, you'd go and do a swap with some people at a US college. And then you'd come back for your fourth year. So it was going to be a four-year degree. And I just thought, you know what, why not? Like, that would be a really fun thing to do. This was a huge mistake. So very much when I was at school, I was like, oh, I'm so done with school now. I'm way too cool. Can't wait to go to uni and grow up and do what's next. And then when I was at uni, especially when I wasn't loving my course, I was still having fun, but I was very much like, this isn't like the best way to learn. It's very inefficient. I'm not loving psychology. I'm not here to like get my psychology degree and run off. I'm quite happy to just like get this done and move into the working world. And whilst I was at university, all the best things I did, obviously, was like being in plays. I directed a play which I loved. I produced a play. I was helping friends out with media projects and just dicking around in photography studios. And I maybe should have just realized when I was at uni, like, oh, I think I did realize this when I was at uni. I was like, oh, I should work in media. Everything I'm doing here is like not academic stuff. It's producing stuff, working in production, making things. And it kind of took me those 2 years initially at university to realize all the favorite things I was doing was working in media, for me to be like, oh, work in media. I did have some friends who were doing media studies, and I'll be honest, that, not to be prejudiced against it, that didn't really seem like a good degree to do because of how long the course is, 3 years, and what they were learning. I always slightly felt like this was a bit of a rip-off. I would see them like cutting and gluing posters as like the submitted work. And I think to this day, once I did start working in media, I think I picked up and learned in, a few months to a year of working than they would have done in 3 years of a course. Again, I didn't do media studies. That was just my impression. And speaking to people who were doing media studies, and they would also, in some senses, agree. I think you need to be really careful now, with these 3-4 year courses, what you're paying for in terms of the uni experience and the knowledge. That's my only advice on media studies. But so I was on for a 4-year course, and I got into my second year. And although the opportunity to go and do a year abroad in America would have been amazing, I kind of couldn't be asked. And the reason I couldn't be asked is because I'd have to do a whole nother year of education when I came back and do 4 years, which I really didn't want to do. The idea of doing a gap year was more appealing to me. And the idea of just like starting a career and working and doing something in media was so much more exciting to me. And I remember in my second year, lots of people had like changed their course, and it had been a thing that had very easy to do. Like my friend had changed his course, he did it in first year, and I'd asked people like, oh, if I just didn't want to do the American studies, can I just do straight psychology? And it was very much like told to me that yes, that's very much possible. You can essentially transfer your credits. You can not do the year abroad. You can just do a straight psychology degree, and you can basically just finish. And I made this decision. I was like, as much fun as it would be to go to America, I kind of feel like I'd be wasting my time. It'd be another year of finances, another year delayed. And so I basically got in touch with the department, and I was like, hi, this is in my second year. I'd like to transfer from psychology with American studies to a 3-year psychology course. And it was all sort of like very easy, very fine. Yeah, you'll just be back here for this thing, blah, blah, blah. And it was great. I transferred to straight psychology, dropped the American studies, and it was all fine. And so then I did my second year, which I had so much fun. I was in a play. I met some great friends, and I met George, who I do Pulp Kitchen with. And it was like one of the most fun, experiences doing theatre at uni, and it was great fun. And during my second year, I failed a stats module, obviously, right? Which is not ideal, but it's very common. Like lots of people fail modules. Yeah, it usually was in psychology. It was the stats that people would fail. A lot of people fail modules, and what you typically do is you just retake that module in year 3. So usually by January exams, January exams, you'll just do that module again, and it rolls over. And, assuming you've got enough credits, which I did have from my other strands of the course, you just basically go and retake that, and it's not a problem. I went through my whole summer. I knew I'd failed the stats module, but I was like, it was okay. I just assumed it would roll into the next year. And I had my whole summer, wasn't contacted by the university. There was no sense that anything was wrong. Got to September, started my third year. You know the process, like you put a deposit on accommodation, and you're usually like, you've spent money on that. You've organized a house, and I've like moved in, and I'd done, I think it was like nearly 3 weeks of third year I was in. And I was producing a play at this point with a friend. Like I properly like started third year. I'd started going to lectures, and these universities have these online terminals where like you log in and you can see your portal, and it's like where you get your timetable. And I was logged into it, but there was this extra portal you need to log into, and every time I logged into it, it kept saying error, like this weird like error 340004. Go and see administrator, right? And I was like, I kept like not doing it because I didn't actually need to do it yet, and I was just like a student who wasn't really prioritizing things. I kept like not doing it, and then eventually I needed to get through, so I like contacted IT, and I was like, hi IT, like yeah, I've got this issue, I'm not allowed in my portal, I keep getting this error to like look at this thing. And IT were like, that's a bit strange, let me look into that for you. Like 2 days goes by. And then 2 days later, IT come back to me, and they're like, yeah, James, the reason you can't get into your portal is that you're not meant to be in third year. You're meant to be on a year out to retake your stats exam. And I was like, you what? And they were like, yeah, you're not meant to have been here in third year. And I was like, okay. My heart sank a little bit. I was like, okay, well, that's a mistake, because I was attending seminars and like my name was on the register. Like I just was enrolled in the course, which was really strange. And IT were like, yeah, we can't really sort of like override this. It needs to be dealt with the exam board and your department. And so I was like, okay, I see why this has happened, because I think the assumption is that I'm meant to be on a third year away from my 4-year course. I explained to them, I think it's because I transferred from a 4-year course to a 3-year course. I think this is the confusion. I'm sure it can be fixed. They were like, yeah, you just need to speak to your exam board and your head of department. And my understanding is that sort of they hadn't known that some sort of online portal didn't know that I wasn't going to the US to do a year out and take my stats exam. I was here for third year. And so I remember they were like, you need to just contact the exam board and let them know that you're enrolled in third year. So I did that. I contacted the exam board, explained the situation over email, and they immediately were like, we don't accept this. You need to withdraw and take a year out and do your stats exam in January. And I was just a bit like, what? And my heart sank, because I had already moved in. Nobody had told me. I was getting quite annoyed because, it's not fair to tell someone in September of their third year after they've moved in, started the course, that actually, because we didn't tell you, you need to now move home with an unplanned gap year just to retake to retake one exam. And I just thought it was so stupid. And I remember it was this very like administrative, no, we reject this proposal. So I remember going to the office of the exam board with a handwritten letter, just because I was obviously getting quite worried and I wanted to explain the situation to someone, like a human being. And I remember doing that, and they just weren't interested. This guy who I really just sort of thought was just a bit of a paper pusher, rules guy who didn't really see the humanity in the situation, the fact that I would be really upset and displaced to have to just like pull out of my third year into an unplanned gap year to retake one exam. Like, it just didn't make sense. And I really tried to like plead with him, and I wrote them this note just to explain like the fact that I was on a 4-year course. Then I went to a 3-year course, and I think it would make sense for me, welfare wise and logistically, with the fact that I wasn't told to just let me roll in third year as I've started. He was basically like, the exam board's decision is final. There's nothing I can do for you. Like, basically, fuck you, get out of here. I remember saying to this guy, I was like, you have to understand, like, you might lose me as a student if you tell me to go on this unplanned gap year. Like, I'm not just going to want to sit at home and just wait to do one exam. Like, it just seems so unfair. And it was really unfair. And I really do sort of like resent the university for like having me slip through the cracks in so many ways, because I was made to feel like I was a failure. And of course I'm responsible for like failing that stats exam. I'm not saying that like that's okay, but so many of my peers in my course failed that same exam, and they also went back in January to do it, but were still allowed to be in third year. So there was such an injustice to it. And I knew that I was in the right, and the friends that I told about this were like mortified, and they were also sure that it could be solved. And it was just really like confusing and devastating. I remember I went to the head of the psychology department. I was literally like, I was upset. I was really sort of like sad, and like, I just couldn't believe that I'd fucked up in such a large extent. And I went to the head of the psychology department, and I'm quite happy to admit, like, I was sort of on the verge of tears, because I was so upset that the exam board person that I dealt with on site had been so dismissive of trying to help me and couldn't see the humanity in it. And to his credit, the head of psychology was so nice about it. And he sat me down and he looked at everything and he said, yeah, this isn't fair. I'm going to try and help you. Let me get back. Let me circle back to this, and I'll do what I can, which I really appreciated, because it was the first time someone like had looked at the situation like a human being and not a computer, and had understood that, if you just displace someone, after they started their third year and have to like move home and not do the degree, that's just really poor form. And like, I remember just checking my emails. I was like, nobody had told me that I couldn't do third year. Nobody had sent me an email saying like, you're not to enlist. Like, it was just such a massive cock up. So I explained that to the head of psychology, who was a really lovely guy, and he was like, let me see what I can do. I remember I'd called my mum and told her at this point that this was happening. I tried to sort of sort it by myself, but I told my mum, which again was like really hard for me, because I really felt like I had failed and flunked, which on one hand I had, but it sounded so much worse to be like, I failed this exam and now they won't let me go into third year, even though it was something that was really, it was hard to explain to them. That's a really normal thing to do, but I'm in this really weird admin fuck up situation. And it was just like, I remember telling my dad was really difficult, and he was obviously like furious. And it was just really, really hard. But anyway, my mum, like the legend that she is, she got the train down to Brighton to like meet with me again. Meet with the head of psychology department. We went to go meet him like maybe 2 days later, and he basically couldn't help me. And he was devastated. He was like, I've spoken to the exam board and I also can't get them to change this decision. It's the way in which credits were allocated when you took out that third year. And I just couldn't believe it. And I was so upset and so angry and so embarrassed that I had to drop out and tell my friends that like I have to leave now. And I told the people I was producing this play and like I have to go home. I told like it was just really embarrassing. It was like I felt like such a fuck up. And he was so also annoyed that he couldn't help me. And I was also just like, why is this such a terrible cock up for the university? Like, why can no one just solve this? And he was like, look, you're just going to have to take a year out, do your stats exam in January and come back to complete your third year. Also, I'd be coming back when all of my friends were gone. So I'd just be like alone at university doing my third year, which I know is obviously you can make new friends, but I just was also like, I remember saying to this guy, I was like, do you understand? Like, if you make me go on this year out, I'm probably not going to come back. And I knew deep down in my heart, as soon as I was going to have to take a year out to redo one exam, I was never going to come back. That's just where I was feeling about that time again at university of like, I already changed from a 4-year to a 3-year. I'm already ready to like take the next step in my career. I'm not like dedicated to like getting a degree. And so I'll be honest, like making that call to my parents and having to like move out of my house and move back home was like really, really hard and really tough because I felt like such a fuck up. I remember like calling my other mates from school who are at other universities, like explaining, and I just like, every time I told someone, like a piece of me died inside. I think also people maybe like didn't believe me when I said I only failed one exam and that I was like, I just failed everything. And it was just like deeply embarrassing and sad. I was totally like ripped out of my social group. And bear in mind, like in the third year of university, like none of my friends were back in London. All of them were still at uni. So I'd moved back to London with no plan, no like job that I'd been working this summer where I could like save up and do some traveling unplanned. I didn't have a job. I didn't have a degree. I didn't know literally anything of what I wanted to do. And I just felt like this dropout fuck up. And I became deeply insecure about like my abilities as someone who could perform in the working world. And it recontextualized for me in a really negative way all where I'd fallen short in other elements of academia, which like now I look back, I wasn't a bad student. I did well, I got A's, but I was really framing myself as like, you're not good enough and you won't perform and you'll be a failure. This has all been leading towards this. And I'd say even to this day, I'm a lot better now. It's been like 10 years. It's been like 10 years since that. But I had, in all of my career, I've spent a really, really long time trying to prove to myself and to prove to others that I was good enough and that I would be a success. And that's something I still really, really struggle with, like this feeling of incompetency, not having had a degree, not having crossed that finish line. I've always felt like I needed to overcompensate and overperform to compensate for that. And it was just, I just really, really remember moving home and experiencing what is easily like proper depression for the first time. Just really terrible thought spirals about myself, not having a plan, having no money. And again, I'm not going to sort of like catastrophize it. You know, I was able to move back home and that was okay. I had no dependables. I only just had to look after myself. I'm not trying to say that I was in any sort of real trouble, but more in terms of like my expectations on myself. Oh, that's my phone. More in terms of like my expectations on myself and what I really thought I would go on to do. I did have this, you know, sense that I should go and work in media, but I had no idea where to start. I didn't know what type of media I wanted to do. The first thing I really had to do was just get a job, get any job. And so what you do when you have no skills, no degree. I just not necessarily. So what do you do? I haven't got anything. I just went to go and apply for work at a bunch of restaurants as a waiter. Ended up after like a few weeks, it is actually quite hard to get a job as a waiter, surprisingly. Like you do just have to walk around with your CV, knock on doors, ask people. I ended up getting a job at a restaurant which is now shut called Kensington Place, which was actually it was a fine dining silver service restaurant, which to this day I really value having done that, because I learned so much about order of service and food and wine, and I really sort of developed my interest in food from that job in a way that I think if I'd gone to work at a cafe or a Pizza Express or a Wagamama, I wouldn't have sort of learned those same skills. But I learned so much about fine dining and how to prep a table and what a professional kitchen looks like. And I really sort of grew up, I think, getting my first full-time job, which really helped my mental health. I had great people who worked there. And I can say it 1,000 times, there's nothing like earning your own money for the first time, working your absolute arse off for minimum wage and having some money in your account at the end of the month. And the hours were really long. I was working on my feet till late at night, 1 o'clock in the morning, getting home. My feet, I remember sitting in the shower and my feet were throbbing. And I really do sort of attest working those jobs with just being quite resilient and dealing with chefs who scream at you in the face. I want to do a whole other episode, by the way, on leadership and bosses, because I have quite a lot to say about that, especially if I worked in television. But just working with people who aren't necessarily obligated to be kind to you like they are at a school. It's especially chefs, they're crazy. People would shout at you and it was a bit of a chaotic environment. But yeah, I think anyone, especially someone who wants to work in media and you're young, I would go work in a bar, go work in a restaurant, work on your feet, do events. It will give you a lot of the skills you will definitely want to have ready when you go and do, for example, a running job. So I was working in a restaurant and I also worked in a couple of pubs. The pubs were great fun, a lot easier than the restaurant, but could be cycles of interesting and boring. And there's a bit of this false security with pubs where the idea is that you're working night shifts at the pub, and that's fine because in the day you'll work all day and you'll apply for jobs and do your CV and investigate and research where to work. The reality is, in a pub with lots of alcohol, when you're young, you will do your shift at the pub. You'll probably drink while you're on your shift. And then you'll drink late into the night after your shift with all of your friends who are all surrounded by free beer. You'll get home at 2, 3, 4 in the morning, sleep in till 11, 12, 1 p.m. and then not do any work that day and then just go straight back into your pub shift. And it's this terrible cycle of working nights, staying out late and not working in the day and just getting used to working the pub shift. But I did break that cycle. So here's how my first interaction with media started out. So there were, at the time that I was applying, so now we're talking 2015, 2015, there were these running groups on Facebook, which I think still do exist, and they're called People Looking for TV Work Runners, and it's a London-based runners group. Oh, not London-based, actually UK-based, but a lot of the work is London-based. And production companies, production managers, producers, freelance producers, they post jobs on this feed for people who have no experience, who want to start in television. Sometimes it's just running work for a day, it's driver needed, day runner, and every so often there would be full-on TV contracts. So a show would be running for 3 months, 4 months, 6 months, 12 weeks, and they post the job and it was this is a 12-week running position, must have this, and this. And it was a bit of a frenzy of a jobs board because these posts would come on, get loads of applications, be blasted with questions, then they disappear, and you kind of had to be in the right place at the right time to actually get them. And so many times I would see a job post that was 5 hours old and I would spend the entire evening writing a CV, and by the morning it was gone and it was shut. And it took me a while to realize I need to have my CV ready, I need to have a cover letter ready, and I need to apply to these things as soon as possible because the competition for running positions was really, 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 really high. And so I did a couple of day running jobs, which were okay. And then I saw this one job for a TV studio, and they posted, it was 12 weeks of work, and it was going to be 2 to 3 days a week. And, they say the experience needed. It was really just have you got any media experience, CV, cover letter, blah, blah, blah. And you don't have any experience, and that's okay. But anyway, I applied to this I remember, sorry, I was refreshing the post just like in my room, and I saw the application come up, like it had gone, and I was like, oh my God, that's great. Like 12-week running job. That's incredible. TV studio to work on an ITV chat show. And I was like, fuck yeah. I have my CV, have my cover letter, ready to go. Bing, bang, boom. Sent my CV off. And then within 20 minutes, that post was gone from Facebook. And I remember the person, I got this position, and the person who hired me said that in that 20 minutes that the post was up, they got 200 CVs, interviewed 15, and hired 2 of us. So that's for context how competitive it was, especially for that type of job, which was 12 weeks. Like that's a good amount of work to block out. And this was through the summer. And I remember going in for the interview, and obviously, look, like when you start out in television as a runner, you don't have any skills, right? You can talk about, working in a pub or maybe like a day's work experience you once did, but really you are just meeting a couple of people from the team, and they're just looking to see that you're a nice person. You could be easy to work with, you'll work hard, and at the end of the day, they'll just get on with you. So it really just was a case of like meeting the people, coming across as interested, talking about what you wanted to do in television, and just like being enthusiastic, effusive, excited about what they were going to do, and just like show that you had a willingness to learn. I remember the production manager, who was awesome, loved her. Her name was Laura. She was really nice, just probably liked my vibe. And she was like, yeah, you seem nice. Like you're quite tall, so you'll probably be quite useful to have on set. And that was basically it. And so I got in with this company that did cooking shows with BBC One. It was Saturday Kitchen, and they were doing a chat show on ITV called Weekend with Aled Jones, which was like a show that was on 8 a.m. on Saturday and Sunday in the morning. And it was like a sort of sleepy ITV light format chat show with different guests and comedy segments. And I would run on that show, and I would work at this company for a while. I would do the day running. So on the show day, there were 3 different types of runners. You would have a talent runner who is responsible to work with a talent producer. So you'd have like 4, 5, 6, 7 different guests in the building for the day. And you were basically responsible for like prepping all the dressing rooms, making sure they had teas and coffees. If they needed food, you were going to run out and go and get them lunch. And just loads of like miscellaneous things, like might have a shirt that needs to be ironed, or they need like something quick for their hair. And you're also sort of liaising with the floor manager and the floor runner, making sure that they're ready on time for when they need to be on set. So that will kind of, although that's not your responsibility, it's kind of in the back of your mind, like, has that person been through makeup? Have they had a coffee? Are they here yet? Like, you would wait until they'd arrive, then you'd message the group and say, X is here. And then the other option was to be a gallery runner. The gallery in television is when all of the producers sit and they call the shots, and basically you just give them teas and coffees and food and lunch all day, and you just basically have headset and they go, can we get a runner to the gallery please? And then you're responsible to just run to the gallery and make like 8 or 9 cups of tea or coffee. Yes, you do make lots of tea and coffee as a runner. And then the other one was a floor runner. So you are on set with the floor manager. You're responsible for helping with things like continuity, make sure everyone's got water on set. If they needed gaff tape, if they needed an extra wire, if you need to go and get a different filter or go and get someone from tech, you would basically be the one to go and run that. And that was always the most exciting one because you got to sit behind the camera and watch the show. And I really learned watching from floor managers. I learned from seeing how the researchers prep their segments. And it was just great. And I was working with a really fun group of runners at the time who I got on with really well. And I think we were a really good team. And once I was doing that job, it became really clear to me that like, this is so much fun. And yeah, I was still working for basically just above minimum wage, and the hours were really long, and I was still working on my feet. But for me personally, coming out of school and university, it was the best job I could have had. Now I think about it, like, it was so dynamic. I was talking, I was engaging, I was problem solving, I was running around town, just solving problems and feeling useful. And I just don't think I would have enjoyed sitting down at the same desk all day and working on something quietly without talking to people. That's totally not my bag. And I just remember having so much fun. And the production team, who were all above me, were just really cool and fun and aspirational. And they were sort of like producers and assistant producers and researchers, and they had all their fun stories of working in different TV shows. And we would go in the green room after a show, and we would have drinks and stay out late, and I just got totally sucked into this world of television. And I have lifelong friends to this day from the friends I made working in television and people you're running with. Like you're working hard and you're treated like shit sometimes, and people are rude, and you have to clean up mess and clean toilets and get rid of gross food. And there's this sort of like universal suffrage of like, we all went through this together, and we have so many incredible stories that like to this day we howl with laughter. And even though TV now in 2025 as the time of recording might not be what it was, if you can be a runner in commercial or you can be a runner in TV, I just really, really recommend it if you're young. Like, it just is the best way to do a bunch of different things, see a bunch of other people more experienced than you working on something, and you get to look and learn and watch and see a bunch of different careers, and it really helps you nudge yourself to go, well, what would I quite like to do in media or in television? And I didn't really know at the time, but sometimes we would go out on shoots and there'd be like a shoot for the day, and we'd be, a couple of cameramen and a producer, and I would just be there to help. And you would go and you would just basically help them out, but I didn't realize how much I was learning by watching. And I was watching shoots and people work and write cards and change lenses and talk about composition and do sound, and all of these things I didn't realize I was absorbing like a sponge, which I didn't know at the time would be essential to my job. And basically, I was working in that job, and I was still technically on my year out. And every time I did a job interview, I was always like fucking terrified for them to ask, like, oh, what degree did you get? And I'd have to say, I got 2 years at Sussex doing psychology, but I don't have a degree. I thought that was going to be like devastating. And the funny thing is, every time somebody asked me about my degree and I would tell them briefly the situation, I thought it would be like, takes no on paper. Oh, it shows that you're not a finisher. It shows that you aren't that driven. You're not that focused. I thought all the worst things in my head. But every single time, people would say, that's brilliant. Yeah, look at you. And now you're out working. Like, you made the best of a bad situation. That's fantastic. Oh, look at you. You're such a self-starter. You go get it. People loved it. People absolutely loved it. And I always thought, like, I'm going to get so close to getting the job, but they're going to give it to someone who's got a degree. But it was never a problem. But basically, just to circle back, I'm getting distracted. I was technically still on my year away to do my stats degree. And I remember I was so fucking annoyed. I went to go redo that stats exam in January, and I was so mad because, I just wasted my time studying for that fucking stats degree. But when I went to that exam hall, I saw all of the people on my course who had also failed that stats degree retaking it. And that made me so mad. And I already kind of knew by then I was never going to go back, but it made me so fucking angry that all these other people who had failed the degree, who failed that part of the course, just like me, were just able to roll into third year, because it just really affirmed the injustice and the cock up from the university that they couldn't help me. And I knew by that point I'd started in television. I was never going to come back. And after that summer, I got offered a full-time running position to be the in-house runner at that studio. And those are like really, really rare jobs. And I really loved the company. It was hard work, but they really liked me. I think they saw me like progressing in that company, and they wanted to offer me a full-time running position. And I would have been mad to turn it down. And I had this decision to make, which was I either don't accept it, kill the momentum of my entire TV career, take an entire year out to redo a degree, which I don't need, which is going to cost me another however many thousands of pounds, completely alone, without friends, in something I know I'm not going to pursue. Or I could bin off the degree, or technically just wait to do my third year, accept this full-time job, and just start working in television. If it doesn't work out, I can go finish my degree. And obviously I chose to just accept that job. I was never going to turn it down. And it was sort of like a really great start for me, because I had a full-time running gig, which, don't get me wrong, was still really hard work, but it was like 5 days a week, consistent salary, and it was sometimes 6 days a week, because I would work the Saturdays to do the live show. So I had an option to earn a little bit of extra money. And I'm so glad I did that. It would have been like starting all over again to have not taken that job. And I met loads of great people. I worked on some great shows, did some haunted house shows, did lots of cooking shows. And after that year, I got offered, it was about 7 months, I got offered to become a junior researcher on the chat show that was going to happen in the summer. Same version of the chat show as before, But this time it was going to be with Zoe Ball, the radio host, who I'm still kind of in touch with now, who's lovely. And she was like the coolest presenter ever. And it was my first ever job as a junior researcher. And if you don't know what a researcher does, for example, on a chat show, let's imagine it's Graham Norton, and let's imagine Chris Pratt is coming on the Graham Norton show. All of those conversations and all of those prompts that Graham Norton says on the show, when he's like, oh, and Chris, and you had a funny story on set, didn't you? All of that is pre-organized. All of that is pre-arranged. Any segment, any prop, any story to tell has all been heard before. There are no surprises in television. So what happens when Chris Pratt gets to come on the show is a researcher from that show organizes a time to speak to Chris Pratt and his team. And basically you have an entire phone conversation with that celebrity, about what they're promoting. So it's like, oh yeah, you're promoting Guardians of the Galaxy. Great. Is there anything else you wanted to talk about? Yeah, I want to talk about my challenge thing. Great, we'll throw that in. And then what you're searching for as a researcher is funny stories, funny anecdotes, things that people didn't know, exclusives, something that is going to like really land. And then if Chris Pratt is on with Hugh Jackman, right? Do they know each other? Have they worked together before? Do they have a funny story? Do they have a thing? You have to ask all of these questions. And you have to make it work for a TV show. You have to check like what's going to work. And if we're playing a game, do they have a link to the game? And so you basically end up writing what's called a brief. And every presenter who goes on a TV show has a brief for each guest. And that presenter will read the brief, read your interview, read the research, and you'll do a kind of like, I always described it as a, the opening in the X Factor when they would read off all of their stats. And it was like, Coldplay have 100 best-selling albums of all time. They're triple platinum. They have sold 1 billion singles all over the world. You had to get like their hit list so that when the producer writes the script, they can introduce them that way. And then you would write down all of these nuggets, quotes from your own interview. You would listen to other TV shows and hear about what they'd said. You'd get some stats about the Guardians of the Galaxy film as an example that you would throw in there. And then I would write a list of 10 questions, trying to think about, in the voice of Zoe Ball, what she would want to ask. And then I run through that with my series producer. We'd call in any props. And then you'd present that information with the brief to the presenter. The presenter would then sort of, make it their own and run around with it. And you essentially got to speak and meet to a bunch of celebrities. So you'd have a phone call with celebrities, lots of British people, loads of music acts I spoke to. And then on the day, you'd be responsible for greeting that celebrity, being like, oh, hi, it's James. We spoke on the phone. So excited to have you on. Yeah, we're going to talk about this. I love that story you said. Zoe really loves it. We're going to talk about that. And then you'd go on the show and you were kind of responsible for that guest performing, which is really tough, but loved it. It was super duper hard work. Like I'd have 2 to 3 guests a week and you'd have to write briefs for all of them. And it was really intense. We did 2 shows a week, every week for 16 weeks. And you would work so hard to build up to that show. And when that show finished, it was like, oh my God, we're done. And then the next day it was like on to the next one and the next one and the next one. And it was like, I worked so hard that summer. I didn't really take a holiday. And I have again, some other thoughts about workplace people and bosses. And I think I want to get into that in another episode because I had quite an interesting interaction with someone who, looking back on it, I think was bullying me. But this is totally a story for another episode. But much as I loved that job and writing and coming up with concepts, I knew quite early on I didn't want to go down this route to become a researcher, assistant producer, series producer, because all the innovation in television basically wasn't there. And we as young researchers at the time, the execs who'd been in television for 20, 30 years would come to you and they'd say, the ratings are going down. People aren't watching TV anymore. Why don't you come up with some new ideas for us to put into the show, and we'll inject it with some innovation and some life and, just some new ideas. And you'd spend genuinely about 2 weeks before you started working on the show, working in development, coming up with games, ideas, segments, and you genuinely come up with interesting ideas. And they'd look at them and they'd go, thanks for your ideas. We're just going to do the same thing we've done for 20, 30 years. And I have found that has been the problem with television. And I've always been sort of into internet media and branded content. And I did, not to say I predicted the fall of television, everyone knew television was going down, but I really did sort of think I read the tea leaves at the time for understanding that TV was shrinking, it was, if not dying, going to be reduced down into a very singular, solitary unit, a lot in the way that I think radio is now. Radio is not dead. I think radio just has become refined into a very specific lane. I'm not saying radio isn't innovative. I'm not saying radio doesn't perform. I think it's kind of settled into its format. And yes, they do some video stuff for radio, but it's kind of like, you know, marinating in its own juices there. I think the same is happening for television. And I really did feel like there are no interesting ideas here. I was getting to the end of my 3 months as 6 months, 6 months as a researcher. And I remember just looking around at the different jobs, and there was just nothing going as a researcher that interested me. It was going to work on something like Sunday Brunch, or going to, and I was working on Saturday Kitchen, didn't want to do that, or going to work on something like Jeremy Vine, didn't want to do that, or just a bunch of all the right stuff. And I was like, I'm not interested in this. I don't just want to do the job for the sake of having a job. And I was like, there's nothing I'm interested in. I don't want to not work for 6 months. I don't want to do something I'm really not interested in. I wasn't loving the like sit down researchy aspect. Actually, I did love it, but I was like, I didn't really think it was for me. So I had a bit of a panic of like, I don't think necessarily TV is where I want to be. And what was happening at the time was that you could be what was called, at the time for me, I was a researcher or an assistant producer. If you knew how, and I had, a weekly rate usually that I would negotiate with producers at the time. So you'd apply for a show and they could say, what's your rate? And you were technically freelance. So you would say, my rate is £500-600 a week, £700 a week, blah, blah, blah. And you would negotiate that rate. But if you were a shooting researcher or a shooting assistant producer, basically you knew how to film on a camera, your rate would go up by about 50%. And so I was like, I already quite like cameras. What if I learnt how to shoot? And that's something I'm quite interested in picking up. I'd been on quite a few shoots. I loved films, like, you know, it was all kind of cameras at the time. Maybe I should do that and go in a more production side of it. So I remember I was thinking about this when I was a runner. I spent almost my entire monthly salary on a Canon 80D, which, if you know, is sort of like an intermediate prosumer hybrid camera. It's predominantly a stills camera with an APS-C sensor, but it had really solid video, and it was about £600 I paid for it. And it was a really great camera for me to get, not know how to use, and really grow into. And so basically I just started messing around with that camera, and for the first time, it was like, oh my God, I fucking love cameras. I absolutely love, and at the time it was photography. And I started taking photos. Remember, this is like 2017, 2018 now, like Instagram's really prolific, those like filters and people sharing photos. And I started getting really into photography and became this like amateur, self-professed, semi-professional photographer. And I realized that brands were really starting to innovate with how they advertised. And it was, you know, the dawn of social media, short form, quick advertising, where the budgets were way, way smaller. It wasn't a campaign or an ad. It was content. It was commercial branded content. And there was a window for people of a certain size who had cameras and had a sort of like television marketing background to work with brands and essentially start doing day rates. And so I taught myself how to do photography, absolutely loved it, became completely obsessed with cameras, went down that whole rabbit hole, and started basically trying to see if I could get any photography work. And I remember the first thing I did was I knocked on a bunch of pubs near where I lived and basically offered them if they needed any food to be shot, because I was a TV food photographer. Like, I'd worked on Saturday Kitchen. I was like, I'm a specialist. Like, do you need any food shots? And loads of people said no, but this one pub said yes. And I remember they said, how much would you charge? And I said £200. And I thought that was loads of money. And they were like, yeah, sure. And I was like, oh my God. And all I had to do was take some pictures of like their Sunday roast and their fish and chips. And it was like 2 hours of work, and I got to eat the food, and I got paid £200. And I was like, oh my God, I used to have to work like 2 days to earn 200 quid. And where did this go? And then at the time, where did it go next? So my friend was pulling pints for this events company, right? Like, you know, they get students to like pull pints for events companies. And she knew someone who was like running one of those things. And they were doing huge brand activations for Asahi UK, which is a big Japanese beer company. And Asahi UK also owns brands like Peroni, Fuller's, Meantime, Cornish Orchards. They're a huge, like, you know, entity unto themselves. And I remember she was like, oh, they need someone to film this Asahi activation event. Would you mind going to film it? And I was like, fuck yeah, hired a camera. Didn't own a camera, like a proper video camera at the time, was like spending money on renting it. And yeah, it was like I ended up meeting people who worked at Asahi. Asahi was spending loads of money on commercial branded content and activations. And I ended up meeting Asahi, and they just started messaging me quite a lot for days of work. And all of a sudden I was working with a known brand like Asahi, and within that brand, loads of other brands like Peroni, Fuller's, Meantime. And from there, like, I really just developed my connections, my ability, the camera kit that I owned, and basically mostly pivoted completely out of television. I would still do the odd day in television. Like, I would cover for friends that still worked at those companies. And I was still sort of kept my toe in it, but mostly I was now working as a videographer, and the day rates I could charge as a videographer were so much higher than what I was charging to be a researcher or an assistant producer. Like, I could earn in a day what would take me a week to earn. And it was kind of transformational for me to be like, oh, if I figured out a way to work 3-4 days a week doing this, I could like 2-3x my income. And in so many senses I did. And I realized that the commercial sector was so much more active and vibrant. There was money there. The innovation was there. There was so much more creativity in that space where you weren't filming a huge ad. You were just filming a short form video. And it was, I offered photography and video, and I kind of never looked back. And I really sort of like taught myself how to be the best videographer I can. I spent a lot of money on equipment, and now you get to rent that equipment out, because when you make money from video, you know, you don't just charge for your day, you're charging for the equipment that you own, which costs money, and you're essentially renting out that equipment with your own services. And then from there, I've just done a load of stuff. I've always kind of stayed in that food, travel, booze, wine, beer, hotels, hospitality sector, which I've always really enjoyed. It's always been like consumer stuff that's very light-hearted. I did a bunch of architecture stuff as well, which was really enjoyable. Done like a fair amount of just like corporate gigs. Yeah, I did 3 months at a media agency once, where I was a shooting researcher for hire, which is quite an interesting one. I met some great friends there. And every time every few months, you'd meet new people and new teams, and my network just grew, and the amount of clients that I knew grew. And I got in with a couple of media companies who I still have really great relationships to this day, and who hire me for amazing projects. If you follow me on Instagram, you'll see that I work with a company that does shoots for companies like Marriott Bonvoy, Waitrose, BBC Food. And yeah, I kind of absolutely love where I landed working with cameras and working in commercial branded content. It's a job to me that is still sort of so me. It's very techie. I'm good at it. I love working with people. I love working in studios and sets with others. I really enjoy that challenge of being responsible on set for how something looks, and sometimes like looking around and realizing, oh, I'm the most qualified person to get this done. Yes, it is really long days and long shifts, but also the hard work pays, and the more I worked, the more I earned. And especially coming out of COVID, I had so much work that involved travel, and I would do something like 35 flights in a year, traveling all around the world and being paid to do it. And it's been like some of the best. I've always been so lucky that ever since I started working, ever since that TV job, my work, though hard work, it never felt like a job. It never felt like a burden. I've always, and I hope this continues, I've just absolutely loved doing what I do, and I know I'm really, really lucky to say that. And I've always been excited at the prospect of more work. And there's times where I've been really, really slammed, and yeah, I'm really, really tired. And I worked 7 days a week, including my weekend. But I've always just loved it. I've worked with fun people, and yeah, there've been like shit shows where people have been rude, talent have been rude. It's been too late. There's been cock ups, but I wouldn't trade it for any other career. And it's like, it's so obvious to me that the kind of person I was when I was younger that this is what I should have been doing. And I think like if I could go in a time portal and go to my 12, 13-year-old self, or even the saddest time when I was, 20, 21, when I dropped out of uni, I would have loved to have just steered James, just pivot slightly in the right direction to know that like this is what you're meant to be doing. Obviously the lessons I learned were sort of all leading me to this path, but in that fantasy I think I would have reassured a younger me to be like, think more literally, don't try and overthink what you should be doing. It's really obvious what you should be doing. And I've just really enjoyed that, and I do really recommend it as a career. I think photography, videography, production, it's a kind of career that will take you places. You will meet celebrities, you'll meet really talented people, you'll be flown all around the world and be paid to do so. And so I just do really recommend it. In terms of like my advice for other people, I would love to hear questions from people if they had questions about specific things related to, what camera equipment to buy, what kind of avenues to pursue, because it's so different for everyone and everyone's got different preferences to what they want to do. And now comes the presenting and podcasting era. So I at the sort of part of when I was doing commercial branded content, before COVID, there was a job opportunity to work at a CrossFit brand, and they were really growing. CrossFit was really growing at the time, and they were looking for a full-time videographer, which I didn't want to do because I had other clients, but I liked the idea a lot of having a part-time gig that was a guaranteed minimum income. And it was going to be 3 days a week, and the other 2 days or weekends, I could do what I wanted to do. And so I interviewed for this position that was kind of an everything job. And it was a bit of a red flag because they wanted me to do design, photography, videography, shoot, record, edit. And I was a bit like, that's quite a lot. You want like basically 3 jobs in one. But you know what? It was 3 days a week. The money wasn't amazing, but what it was consistent and reliable. And I was like, if I have that as a base, I can still do other projects. And I did take it, and I'm glad I did it, and I regret it. I regret it because it took up too much of my time and I wasn't as available to pursue the other jobs I wanted to do. And if I'd had the urgency to do that, I think I would have done better. Why I'm glad I did it is that I really upskilled and learned a lot. What I was doing e-commerce, so like photographing people in front of a white background, shooting apparel all day, every day, e-commerce, very boring, very repetitive. But I was also doing lots of creative, scrappy videos and just getting really quick and sharp at fast at shooting and editing. And I think that's really helped me just sort of like work quickly and problem solve quickly and be quite resourceful with limited resources. And it was very fast turnaround, very fast paced, selling shoes, working with models, doing a campaign, quickly making a video. This shoe's just come in, we need to sell it. It's Black Friday, we need to do a sale thing, 9/16, 16/9, 1 by 1, go, make. And I think it just did improve me. But anyway, I was doing that until we got to COVID. COVID happened, that old nugget. And I had signed on to do 6 months, I think. I had 6 more months to do with them. And I think I remember agreeing that in February. I signed a contract, and obviously COVID happens in March 2020. And even though I wasn't technically like a full-time employee, they still, when everything was shut during COVID, they still paid for my salary, which was really cool of them to do. So in that first COVID period when nobody was working, there were no shoots. Nobody knew what COVID was yet. Everyone was work from home. It was, you must stay at home. They furloughed me through that, and I didn't have to work. Because I think if I didn't have that, I would have been fucked. I would have just not had an income. My other mates who were working television, unless you were working on like Saturday Kitchen or The One Show, one of those, they were called like core shows. If you weren't working on those, there were no shoots. You basically didn't have an income, which was really, really tough. So I was so lucky. This company treated me like a member of staff and had me paid all the way through furlough. We then had that summer period, if you remember, where like you could go for walks with people, and if you were outside and socially distanced, you could do shoots, like when it was green lights and, oh God, I forgot about it. But yeah, we were doing a couple of shoots that summer safely outdoors, and there was a bit of work, but essentially that all came to an end, and the company had to pivot. And then the following when did they do it? When did they make me redundant? I can't remember. They basically made me redundant. They were like, listen, like we can't do this anymore. Like it was too higgledy-piggledy. And I think they've since rehired. I think the company's shut now. Now they're reopening it. But anyway, I got made redundant and it was fine because I think leaving that was the push I needed to really like go out and find more clients. And then I got my 3 days back. And then I was immediately the busiest I'd ever been, which was great. So I have no regrets there. But coming out of COVID, although like really loved my career and I was busy, I had this panic of like, fuck, I am totally responsible for all my own work. Like if something like this happens again, I'm totally reliant on third parties to give me my work. Like I don't have any revenue that I generate. I don't really run a business, and I have to lend out my time for money, and I only have 7 days in a week. And my friend George and I had originally tried to start a podcast in 2016, 2017, but never really got round to it. And I remember having this idea of like, what's something that I can do to use all the skills that I have, all the equipment that I have, all the knowledge, which I know is such a barrier to entry for so many people to make content. A lot of people don't own cameras. They don't know how to make videos. They don't know how to record high quality audio. That costs money. That takes time. That's an investment. That's usually what stops people being able to create and be creators. And I was like, I'm doing all of this work for brands. Why don't I make a project for myself that hopefully one day could generate revenue? And so I remember I left George this voice note and I said, listen, would you want to pick this idea up again? These are my thoughts. I think it should be a video podcast about films. Films is the only thing I was interested in that I think I could talk about theoretically every week forever. There's nothing else I would like. There's nothing else I would want to talk about. And George, who's, not only does he love films, he's hilarious, one of the smartest people I know. He really does know his stuff. And although he wasn't sort of working in production and media in the way I was, I knew he'd have so much to offer in terms of like, we just got on really great. We had amazing chemistry. And I kind of felt like from how we had talked before, we would just have a really, really great time and it would all sort itself out. We had a lot to figure out, and there's a lot that goes into, creating a podcast with someone. And I think it very much started as a side project, a hobby. And I remember we said, look, this probably isn't going to do very well for a while. I said, I think I was willing for no one to listen to it for 2 years before I quit. Because these things do take time. And he kind of agreed. And, it was 6 months of recording a podcast and it was nothing, like nobody listened. But then we sort of were really semi-grafting TikTok and Instagram, and all of a sudden, like I was putting out clips, and one clip got views, and all of a sudden the rest is history. And we've just been able to have an audience, and we're going to talk about that more on Pulp Kitchen. But essentially, that's opened this whole window for me as a podcaster, as a presenter, as a podcast producer. The kind of things I can offer clients now as like a podcast consultant. That's all kind of stemmed from that, and that's a whole nother journey leading to what I do now. And especially in the last year, the types of opportunities that we've been offered to interview celebrity talent and actors has kind of been transformational for me of, again, hearkening back to those drama skills of not finding it easy, but like sitting down with someone and to talk passionately about something I'm genuinely interested in. That's come so naturally to both me and George. And it was just this sort of light bulb moment of I should really try to pursue being someone who can talk to people on camera and work as a presenter. And obviously in my work, I work with quite a lot of presenters and people on camera. And I think I have a fairly good idea of what makes a good talking head, what makes a good piece to camera. And so far, I've just really enjoyed interviewing people. With Pulp Kitchen, I do it with films and actors. And with this is kind of what I want to do with other people in media. And that's kind of the story broadly about how my career led to this. And to where I'm at now. And it's still evolving. And I did make a comment before about how my career changes every 18 months. And it really does. Like one day I'll be a runner and then I'll move into a researcher. Then I'll pivot towards like being a photographer, commercial branded content. And from commercial branded content, I worked in e-commerce, and then in e-commerce working at an agency to working doing like stuff for brands, and then going on to do a podcast. Now I do presenting. I've only been working for like 10 years, but in that 10 years, I look at it and it keeps changing. And I like that because it means I'm just exploring lots of different things, but it's also very, very daunting because I'm like, what the hell's going to happen in 2 years' time, and what will I be doing? But nonetheless, like really excited to have started this podcast, and I think quite therapeutic for me to reflect on certain things as like an audio diary. And I hope this has been interesting, and I hope it gives context for people who maybe know me a bit from the podcast and who didn't know my background in sort of my journey as a career. And that's basically where I'm at with my life story, and the story will go on from there. Or life story, sort of like career story. So thank you so much for listening. I've got some really, really great guests lined up for the next few weeks. Some of you hopefully you've maybe seen on social media, but I really want to just continue this conversation. I've got other solo ones I really want to do and tell specific stories about bosses and toxic people and being bullied at work. I really want to talk. What was I going to say? I really want to keep this whole conversation going. I've got loads of other things I want to talk to you guys about. And similarly, if you have any questions, please comment below. And I'd love to maybe do like a Q&A where I talk about sort of the media landscape. And I think I would like to cover news in some sense and see where like media trends are heading. But that's all we have time for. I've gone on for an hour and 10. I hope this was interesting. Thank you so much for listening to this and for giving me the time. I can't tell if it's been really, really boring. But just another reminder that if you like what I do and you're a fan of Pulp Kitchen, we're doing our first ever live show for our 200th episode, which is happening on Wednesday, the 8th of October. The tickets are now live and they're selling fast. So if you are interested in that and you want to come and see me and George live, definitely go and head over. We're so excited to do that. It is our first ever live show, which we're so excited to do. And that's all from me. I also have a Patreon with Pulp Kitchen where we do ad-free content and exclusive news show. So go and check all of that out. And I look forward to seeing what's next. I've been kind of rambling towards the end. Bye-bye. Thank you so much.